Good morning. My name is Larry Brame, and welcome to the March Forum of the Missoula City Club. I'm welcoming you on behalf of our Board of Directors. The City Club is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, member-based civic organization whose sole purpose is to sponsor these monthly forums on topics of interest to the Missoula community. Our bylaws actually say the mission of the City Club is to bring together people to inform and inspire citizens on issues vital to the Missoula area through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thoughts. Now, this is where I'd normally say what our format is, but today's a different format, so I'm going to allow our introducer today to explain that. I would like to make a little pitch for the City Club. We're rebuilding membership, so please sign up and join us. If you do, then these things are free to you. You can come, and you will know in advance what next month's program is. Today's moderator is a well-known Missoulian. He's known for his good works and his good advice. Jeff Badnock is also the immediate past chairman of this group, and so he's the perfect person to be the moderator for today's forum. With that, Jeff Badnock.
Today's program is an unusual format for a topic about which there has been much discussion, and some of it heated in Missoula, and it's got that demonstrated interest by the people of Missoula about this topic. It makes it perfect for Missoula City Club to present. City Club Missoula is a place where citizens get a chance to hear information about such topics as this, and perhaps just as importantly, are given a chance to both question presenters and to talk with one another about the subject presented. To do this, City Club insists that everyone conduct themselves with civility and good manners. We're here today to learn about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, what they are, and how it is proposed that our municipal zoning code be amended to accommodate them. This is an idea that is being proposed that may have significant and far-reaching impacts for and to Missoula. Once, long ago, David Owen, who used to be the executive of the Chamber of Commerce, appeared at a city council meeting, and before he made his remarks, he made an observation that has stuck with me ever since. And he observed that no one who came to the podium at a public meeting in Missoula came with the idea of diminishing or destroying Missoula. People are involved and interested because they want to promote things that make Missoula a better place. He also observed that people of goodwill can disagree. And that's a value that we at City Club hold very, very dearly to. For today's presentation, we are going to have our topic presented and discussed in a modified debate style by 4 of our own City Council members. Bob Jaffe and Jason Weiner will speak in support of the idea of amending our Missoula Municipal Code to allow accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. They will be given an up to 10-minute period to make a presentation supporting the proposal, followed by council members John Wilkins and Adam Hertz, who will speak in opposition for up to 10 minutes. Following John and Adam's presentation, Bob and Jason will be given an opportunity to respond to them and give a summation of their position for a period of up to 5 minutes. Finally, John and Adam will have a 5-minute period to make their second response and summation. The speakers for each side may allocate their 10 and 5-minute periods between one another however they choose. I will serve as timekeeper and will ask whoever is speaking at the end of their period conclude the thought they are on and to sit down. In order to get through today's program and allow for questions after our customary table talk, I will ask the audience to forego demonstrations of support or opposition to speakers, such as applause and so on. We will thank all the presenters at the end of their combined presentations. During our table talk period, please do two things. First, select a person at your table who will serve as your spokesperson and ask the question you want to offer to the group. Second, formulate your question so that a person can answer it from either side of the issue, since each side will be given an opportunity to respond to every question. In fairness, we'll alternate which side gets to answer the question first, and we will ask the speakers to limit their answers to 1 minute. If you are your table's spokesperson, please be sure to speak directly into the microphone so that MCAT can pick up your voice for a later cablecast of today's program. So with that, I would like to invite Bob Jaffe and Jason Weiner to come up and make their presentation in support of the proposition that Missoula's municipal code be amended to allow accessory dwelling units. Bob?
I know. There you are. All right, thank you all for coming. My name is Bob Jaffe, City Council Representative for Ward 3, which is the University neighborhoods, the Slant Street neighborhood, and the Riverfront neighborhood. So what I wanted to talk about is first to define what the ADU, what we're talking about with ADUs. So it stands for Accessory Dwelling Unit, and essentially refers to where a property owner can build a second smaller unit within their property that has a separate entrance, separate living space, kitchen, bathroom, etc. This can either be, in most cases, is something inside the home. It's generally in the basement, maybe an attic, but also it could be a detached accessory dwelling unit, which would be a carriage house above the garage, those types of structures. So it differs somewhat from a duplex in that it's something that's accessory. It's a smaller unit. Generally, there's the primary unit. It's bigger. It doesn't have all the full rights of a duplex. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, why are we trying to make this change? As Jeff said earlier, this could have far-reaching and profound consequences to our neighborhoods. I actually disagree with that sentiment quite a bit. I think this is a modest proposal that will have little to no major changes in our neighborhoods, and will probably be not something on the ground that at a neighborhood level, at a city level, we'll see any difference from. It will have substantial difference for individuals who are affected by the policy, but on a large scale, I really don't see this being something that will change the character of Missoula forever. I think it will be modest, and maybe even not noticeable in any way whatsoever at the neighborhood scale. So why we're doing this is a few reasons. Missoula is in need of more housing. It's a perpetual problem that we have, that our housing choices are limited, especially on the lower price range. Creating diversity in housing stock is something that I think is very important. I think it's a benefit to our community. The small units, which can serve as extra rental income for a homeowner, can make a huge difference in somebody's ability to be able to afford their mortgage. It creates opportunities for people, for families to own homes, which otherwise they would not be able to afford. It also, accessory dwelling units are generally smaller units, so they are usually lower on the price scale as far as the rental side, and create opportunities for housing for renters. Is there, I could use help on gauging my time. You have something going? Okay, thank you. So creating these housing opportunities, just expanding our housing stock is one of the reasons why I think this is a good idea. Also, creating opportunities for people to age in place. We have an aging population. We have large homes. There are a lot of, if not across the board, certainly anecdotal cases where it's a big deal for somebody to be able to have the prospect of having that second unit that they can then move into at some point, and then be able to rent their home as a way to afford to continue to live on their property. Or the other way around, to have a small unit where they can rent that out, and that rental income and also the support from the person they rent to provides an opportunity to remain in their home as they age. Myself, the first home we bought had a rental unit in the home. It made the difference of being able to afford to live in that house. And I know we've heard plenty of stories from lots of people where that's the case. One of the other reasons we're interested is for safety purposes, that accessory units are something that exist. They've always existed in our neighborhoods. They continue to exist. Having them be legal creates the path to having inspections and things above board. When it's illegal, people are still going to create them because all the reasons I stated, they simply make sense from a housing market standpoint. So people are going to do it whether it's legal or not. And I think it makes a lot more sense for us to create the opportunity for people to be within within the regulations. Some of the concerns that were raised as we discussed this over this last year, primarily the issues that have come up have to do with what we call quality of life issues. There have been substantial problems with noise, with crowding, with parking, generally bad behaving young neighbors that are overcrowded into housing. And I see the accessory dwelling unit proposal as something that will actually help address that problem more so than something that will exacerbate it. We are proposing something where the property has to be owner occupied, and so the owner has to be in the home. Right now, you can have a home in the U district that would have 6, 8 young people living in it, and generally that overcrowding can cause some issues. For somebody to take advantage of this accessory dwelling unit policy, the owner would need to live in the home, and then they would have a small rental. Your overall impact, I believe, would be lower with the accessory dwelling unit than if a property rolled over to become, the highest impact rental property, highest volume rental. Parking we're addressing by requiring added parking for the accessory dwelling units. And overall density, I don't think will be changed in any significant way. That you'll again have that owner occupancy component, which will prevent these from just being where you have a rental, now it's 2 rentals. That's not part of what we're proposing. So I've got a couple minutes remaining, which I am going to turn over to Jason.
Thanks, Bob. I have basically 2 things that I want to share regarding this issue, and I'm sure we'll have lots more opportunity to get into whatever details you want after folks who oppose this have had a chance to present it. The first is a policy level question, and I want to put 2 facts to you. Since 1950, the average house size of an American family has increased 50%. So our houses have grown in their size, square footage, by 50% since 1950. During that time, family size has decreased by 30%. Now, what that says to me is we have a housing stock that's been constructed for families that are bigger than we have right now. And if we want to allow smart, adaptive reuse of existing housing stock, that means allowing people to repurpose when they live and rent and reside on the premises their existing home. I think that's a smart thing to do policy-wise. I think it's a smart thing to do environmentally. It meets the objectives and goals of our growth plans, and it's oftentimes simply the right and decent thing to do to allow your neighbor to reuse a piece of their home as they'd like when they see the need to do so, and when they're staying there to demonstrate their continued stake in the neighborhood they live in. The other thing that I think is relevant to this issue, at least from my perspective, is that I lived in an accessory dwelling unit in an R5.4 zoned neighborhood, Jackson Street in the Lower Rattlesnake, for 8 years. It allowed me an apartment that was cheaper than I would have found elsewhere in the city, and it allowed me to work jobs that didn't pay all that well, and to engage in public service that doesn't pay all that well. And that was really important to me. It was also important to my landlady, who lived upstairs, who had lived in the house for, gosh, I think about 40 years. And we had a relationship that was more than just a landlord-tenant relationship. And I think allowing that more human connection between the people who rent and the people who they're renting from is an added advantage of this proposal. And the final point that I want to make about my own experience renting an accessory dwelling unit and finding it a very humane and decent and fitting way to live is that it did, like Bob say, make a very big difference to the two people who were involved in the transaction, significantly improving both of our quality of life. It did not make a very big difference at the level of the street or the block or the neighborhood, because we first weren't the only people in this arrangement, and because nothing about the way that the built environment appears had changed. The unit that I lived in and the unit that many of my neighbors live in, it already is the character of our neighborhood. Our proposal acknowledges that and allows it to blossom in new locations where it's appropriate.
Next, I'd like to invite John Wilkins and Adam Hertz to make their response.
Hi, thanks for having us today. I'm Adam Hertz. I represent Ward 2 on the City Council, which is the Old West Side, Grant Creek, Mullen Road, Prospect, Windsor Park area. And this is John Wilkins, who represents Ward 4, which is Lewis and Clark, Far Views, Patty Canyon area. Did I miss anything? And part of the university area. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to share our feelings about why we oppose the current proposal to expand allowance of ADUs from a majority of the city zoning districts to all of the city zoning districts. And that's an important point, is that currently ADUs are allowed in a majority of the zoning districts within the city. This is not a proposal simply to allow ADUs, it's to allow them everywhere. There's times when an ADU would have been a good housing option for myself, had one been available within a near distance to the university and my job downtown. I've been a homeowner for almost 2 years, and prior to that, I was a renter for about 8 years in Missoula. I understand the difficult renters market here. I'm not too far out of it. During and after college, I mean, I certainly had my hard times finding safe, convenient, affordable housing. And I think, you know, given that perspective and my work experience in the real estate industry, I think I have a pretty good understanding of affordable housing and the housing market in Missoula as anybody does. So a very small minority in the anti-ADU crowd has insinuated that renters and rentals will only have a negative impact on our neighborhoods, and I want to make it clear that I very much disagree with that. I think that renters, homeowners, and landlords are all very important parts of our community. We need housing options that give renters the opportunity to find affordable, safe housing, give landlords the opportunity to make a return on investment, and respect the rights of all private property owners. ADUs can be a good housing option in some cases, and today you'll hear the reasons why from the other side, but currently ADUs are allowed in the majority of the city, as I said. And so keeping those areas affordable and vibrant can be helped by ADUs, and that's why they're allowed in parts of the city, in parts where people expect them to be, where they've bought their homes knowing that they can be allowed there, where that kind of density was the warranty that they were given when they purchased the home. But I believe that people who purchase homes in single-family areas where city zoning was promised low density, low use, safe street for their children, plentiful parking, and a more suburban type lifestyle have reason to be upset that the city would consider failing to honor the warranty under which they bought their property. What you'll hear from the pro-ADU side about the benefits of ADUs may very well be true. ADUs are a tool that belong in the community's toolbox as far as housing is concerned. But allowing ADUs in all zoning districts is a step towards ridding our community of diverse housing options. It doesn't increase the diversity in housing options. It rids the community of housing options. Single-family housing no longer exists when ADUs are allowed everywhere in the city. Some folks in the city want to live tooth to jowl, and that's fine, and some people want to live in a suburban lifestyle, and that's fine. And we need to have options that respect the desires of all folks that live within our city. There's a lot of good, dignified housing options, and they ought to be available in the city. And I think we do have a pretty good, diverse use of land right now in the city. Allowing ADUs in all zoning districts will homogenize the neighborhoods of our city. And we're a city that values diversity in all different respects. So another theme I just wanted to touch on real quick was private property rights, which have been central. And a lot of people have come up to me and said, you know, I thought you were kind of pro-property rights person, a bit of a civil libertarian, and I am. And, you know, I think the balance of private property rights is not just simply black and white. If an ADU is built next door to your home in a single-family zoning area, your neighbor's been given the opportunity to use their private property as they wish, but it's affected the use of your private property. So it's not just black and white to say that if somebody is allowed to use an ADU, that's their right as a private property owner, because your right as a private property owner impacts the rights of private property owners near you. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Well, I'm going to come from a little bit different angle, and good afternoon, everybody. I think it is noon, so I'm going to go on the process here. This started way before the issue got to where it is right now. It started with Title 20, and when we passed that, which needed to be passed. I mean, there was problems with our old Title 19. So at the end of that, accessory dwelling units were talked about. It was agreed on at that time that they would not put that in single-family neighborhoods. And they did that, so some of us that were against the ADU in single-family neighborhoods would vote yes on Title 20 and pass it. So that's, I mean, you all watch legislative issues and everybody compromises and this kind of stuff. So we thought we were pretty clear that that's not what we wanted. So things moved on a couple of years later, and all of a sudden, here it comes up, and they want to do it. So they did an outreach program. This outreach program, which the city claims wasn't a survey, but they passed out these questionnaires. It was really said at that outreach program that the neighborhoods did not want that were affected. I signed over 80 no petitions on it that day at a table at that outreach program that I have copies of right there to prove what I'm saying. But it kept progressing anyway. So when that got in front of city council on the process, or what happened at that meeting, or that thing, instead of dwelling on that people didn't want it and showing that percentage, they dwelled on another question in the questionnaire that was provided at that outreach program. And that was, would you rather have an 800 square foot house in the backyard or a 600 foot square house in the backyard? And there wasn't a thing on that says, I would rather have none of them. All right? So they jumped on that and ignored all the rest of the things that happened at that and said, this just proves people want it. And they don't want the 800, they want the 600. Well, talk about twisting the truth. I mean, good gosh. So there was the first thing that I saw. Holy cats, this is wrong. Why should neighborhoods have to defend their rights by raising money and getting a protest out there to defend what they already have? That is just beyond me. So Save Our Neighborhood stepped up to the plate. We got a protest out there. And yes, we have achieved our 25% in a couple of areas. Okay? That's another proof that the neighborhoods don't want it. Is this going to alleviate people of the party house next door? This is going to do nothing at all to alleviate any of them problems. We cannot go in and inspect rentals. That's a state law. We tried to get that overthrown, this legislative issue, and it didn't even make it to committee. Okay? So you can't even inspect a rental. You can't inspect it for public safety or anything else. The owner-occupied thing. And back a few years ago, we had a city's attorney's opinion that you couldn't enforce that. Now, all of a sudden, we have a city's attorney opinion that's saying, yeah, possibly we can enforce that. The problem is here, and to be really quite frank, I cannot trust the people down at the city to pass an ordinance and not 3 weeks later change it to something else. Owner-occupied, there is no way to enforce that. There is no way that if a person passes away and that house is sold, that it can't be sold to whoever. What about out-of-state people that own a house that hopefully someday will come back to Missoula? Okay, so they can't rent it out if they have an ADU. We have increased parking. All the things that you've heard does happen, and it's happening right now, and we're taking no steps to fix the problems that are on the neighborhoods right at this moment. And then until we fix those problems, we should not increase any more density in our neighborhoods. And let me tell you, I could speak for this for an hour, but I see my time's about up. So I'll let it go like that, and I'll try to answer questions that you bring to me.
Thank you. At this point in the program, we'll invite Jason and Bob to come up and do a 5-minute response, and then that will be followed by Adam and John coming up and doing their 5-minute response.
It's been a long time since I debated anything. Bob and I are not coached partners. However, we'll try and rebut what we can in this forum, and then hopefully we'll get a chance to address more in the questions. You know, I think I welcome the sentiment that renters are a positive and needed contribution to all existing neighborhoods. I'm curious, how many folks in here are renters? Okay. I mean, you know, that's not representative of the city. And in the participation we've had in the process, we've definitely had more people who own property coming in here and saying that they have an opinion about this than people who rent property. We have, of course, equal rights, but people's participation differs. And that certainly, to me, colors my interpretation of something like the Survey Monkey that we did. Everyone who lives in one of these units, I believe, believes they should be legal. I don't believe anyone who lives in them, and there are hundreds, perhaps thousands, many of which are probably not legal under the current zoning. Many of those, I doubt any of those people believe that they should be thrown out of their home in order to enforce a notion of what a neighborhood should be, that it should be something homogeneous, a single form of life imposed on it. One of the things we heard during the presentation was that this rule takes away diversity from our community. And I think the idea that a rule that enforces a particular form of housing on a whole area, the idea that that is somehow more diverse than a uniform rule that allows people to choose their options regardless of where they live, that doesn't hold it for me. I mean, it'll be up to you to decide what you think is more diverse, a uniform rule that allows actual different forms of social organization, or different rules that enforce a particular form of social organization on specific areas. We also had the idea that zoning is a warranty that people get some sort of property rights warranty when they move into their house. I disagree with that rule. I believe that property rights are not a contract between an individual and the state. They are a social contract, and everyone who is governed in the jurisdiction has a say in what the terms of that social contract. It is up to us to write it for the benefit of the entire community. We have a proposal that does that.
I'd also like to address the issue of private property rights. That I think that it's true that what one person does in their property does affect their neighbor, and finding the right balance of those rights that's a big part of what our zoning code is all about. What's being proposed here is that the ADUs that would be interior to the home would be by right, meaning that a person can do those with administrative approval if they follow all the raft of rules that have been established for it. If they're going to be a detached unit, like in a garage or something like that, then there would be a conditional use procedure, which it means a hearing before council, notice to the neighbors, things of that sort, so that the balance between the different people's property rights and the like can be weighed. That there is a process for going about that. The process. I probably only have like a minute or so to go into this, but the process we've gone through has been extensive. When Title 20 was considered as true, we tried to leave out all controversial policy, introducing anything controversial policy-wise, because we were trying to update the code. There was an important goal that we were all trying to reach, and we didn't want to muddle it up by fighting over small pieces of policy when there was a bigger goal there. But that doesn't change that the question about accessory dwelling units has been lingering in the community now for years, and it's time to address it. We've had an extensive process of public participation in making this zoning change. We've been going on it for about a year now. So in any case, there's a lot there. Let's see. I'm not sure what that note means, but in any case, I also want to address the diversity point that we allow these in the multifamily districts, and say they're allowed in some districts, not others. The multifamily districts are allowed to have accessory dwelling units right now, but they're also allowed to have multiple dwelling units, duplexes and triplexes and the like. So the way the accessory dwelling unit rule was applied there was really symbolic in that there's really no purpose for a property owner to go through all those steps and all those extra regulations in a district where they're already allowed to have a second unit. So even though they are allowed in some units, it's sort of meaningless in the places where they are allowed. Where it's of meaning is in the neighborhoods where, particularly the older neighborhoods, where there's an interest in having slightly denser housing. Right, thanks.
Adam and John. Again, this is for 5 minutes, and we'll follow it up with our table talk, and then that will be followed by a question and answer period.
So quickly, just for your information, I also, when I moved here to Missoula, I lived on Jackson Street. What a coincidence. I lived in a house that the lady built an apartment downstairs. At that time, back in the early 70s, I had no idea that anything was illegal or not. And I got kicked out of that house for the reason she was not allowed to do that in a single-family neighborhood. Mr. Weiner already knew it was illegal, but chose to live there anyway. But anyway, so, okay, maybe that's not true. I'm sorry. But the process, I want to talk about the process, and that's my rebuttal is this process. It's taken a year. And the reason it's taken that long is because they keep dragging it out. They're trying to wear down the opposition. And so the opposition will get tired because I notice the same people come to so many meetings, and then they get tired because they feel like they're not listened to. And if you can keep a process going till you wear them people down and they won't show up anymore, you got a heck of a lot better chance of getting what you want to pass, whether it's gravy or potatoes or whatever the subject might be. So if you look at our agenda for Wednesday on the Planning and Zoning Committee, which is now Development Services, you will notice that they are going to be talking about where the doors should be, where a window should be, what way should the house face if you build it in the backyard, how the pitch of the roof going to be. If that isn't dragging the process on and on and on, I'm not sure what is. So, you know, you want this thing, let's get the public meeting, let's start doing the dance and get this dance over with. The biggest problem here is we have a right of protest and we're using it. Okay, you can already build that ADU in them single-family neighborhoods with an overlay. The process is a little strenuous, it's a little long, but it gives the right of the neighbors to say yes or no to your idea. So that's an important thing to already know. We're talking about single-family neighborhoods. We're not talking about anywhere else in town. And those are the most valuable, probably, neighborhoods in all of Missoula. They pay probably the most taxes. They sell faster in the real estate market, which Adam probably can contest because he's in the real estate. I'm not. I just look at what's happening on the ground around my neighborhood. I notice those houses go. Even during recession, those houses go. I give you one quick example. When we did the planned neighborhood clusters where they put like 3 houses on one parcel of land, there's a gentleman, a good friend of mine, that bought one of those, and the only one that happened, well, 2 happened in my neighborhood. This one's on Dearborn. He bought a piece of property with a rundown house in my neighborhood that Transits used to live in, and we wanted that house gone and a nice house to be fixed. That's what he's doing. He can't sell that house. Nobody wants that house without a yard. You know, families come to my neighborhood because of the schools, because they have a backyard. It's single family. They shouldn't have to worry about parking in front of their house and stuff. And that's why they choose single family neighborhoods. And that option should be left open for our future. My daughter and her husband looked for that same type of house and finally had to move to Lolo to find that house that they could afford. They couldn't afford to buy a house and put an ADU on it. Do you know how much it costs to get a loan for a development type venture? It's more than it costs to get a loan for a regular house. So this is not helping any of that. And we need to leave these neighborhoods alone. We need to start going into these neighborhoods and figure out how can we control the party houses. I think we're taking small steps towards that now, but that should be our goal, not infilling our neighborhoods and having people move out of town because all of a sudden we're just infilled to death and people don't want that anymore. My son goes to Kent State out in Ohio. When I look around that neighborhood, which had old houses like the university does over here, and see them in decay, and see the yards just trashed, and the houses all trashed, I'm going, is this what I want for Missoula, Montana, which is happening in Kent? And the answer is no, and if you saw what they have in Kent on these beautiful old houses right next door to their campus, you would just be appalled.
Thank you to both sides for spending your time and eloquently making your case. It's at this point in our program where we have what we call table talk, and we invite you at your tables to discuss what you heard. As I said, select a spokesperson from your table. When we reconvene after table talk, we'll ask that person to present your question to the presenters, and they'll each have 1 minute to answer your questions. So go to it. We'll be back in session in 10 minutes. Okay, we'll reconvene at this time, and Abe will go around to your to your tables. Please identify your spokesman, and again, once you pose the question, the presenters will have 1 minute each to respond to it, and we'll alternate who goes first.
Hi. So my name is Tim Descamps, and the question that we have is that as some background information, the vacancy rate now in Missoula for renters is below the average that people want to see for a balanced marketplace. In fact, right now it's a landlord's market. So the university, I understand that the university and the city met together and agreed that in the next period of time, 5 years or some number of years, they're going to add 1,000 more rental units into the marketplace here in Missoula, and that they believe that by adding those 1,000 units, and that's irrespective of what happens with ADUs, will actually balance out the rental market here in Missoula. So given that the city is already planning to add 1,000 units of rental stock into the city, why then do we need to have ADUs in single-family homes? Because what problem are we trying to solve if, in fact, we don't have a rental problem anymore?
Thanks for the question. I actually meant to touch on this earlier, and we don't need ADUs to solve that problem. But, you know, a statistic recently, Missoula has had a 3% vacancy rate, which is an unhealthy market. It's a landlord's market. But as of the last quarter of 2012, both the National Association of Property Managers and the Missoula Organization of Realtors have noted that the vacancy rate in Missoula is now at 6%, which is within a healthy market. It doesn't include large developments going up on Russell and 39th and you know, other small developments throughout the town. And it also, you know, you have to take into account the people leaving the rentals market, starting to buy homes. We're actually approaching a level where we could become overbuilt and be reaching a rental bubble. And I mean, I applaud the mayor for catching on to this. I think he's about 4 years too late to ask for the 1,000 housing units. I think the free market has responded to that well, and public-private partnership market has responded to that well. But we're growing out of that low vacancy rate into a healthy area, and we could, you know, if we push too hard, could actually see a bubble.
Like I said in my earlier remarks, that I don't believe this will create a dramatic change in the character of neighborhoods or the number of housing units in town. It's more about the individual relationships of the people who are affected. I think it's a fairness issue and a quality of life issue. But also the city, largely in part from the debate that's come from this discussion, has entered into this effort to step up our response to quality of life concerns in some of our neighborhoods. And part of what that has been is this agreement with the university and this effort to create a large number of additional housing units to address housing shortages. And this definitely goes in cycles and so on, and we're on one end of it, but having additional units is something we're after. And we're not talking about publicly subsidized built units. We're just talking about trying to facilitate development with private developers on this. But it's primarily in response to folks saying, we want to address quality of life issues. Housing is one of them. The parking, the noise, the response, and so on. We're actually looking at reorganizing our an actual quality of life department within the police department to address some of these issues.
Thank you. And the next question, and we'll start by having Jason and Bob answer first, and then John and Adam.
Okay. Dennis Gorton. When the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board rejected this ordinance on February 5th, their two main concerns were the unenforceability of the owner occupancy clause and the fact that when you put this ordinance together, you covered all the single-family neighborhoods in Missoula, not just the 5.4 neighborhoods. And a number of them spoke against that because they knew that there was no infrastructure and no transportation out to these other neighborhoods. So it would cause quite an impact on the city. So I was just going to ask you specifically why, instead of just focusing on the 5.4 neighborhoods in the University, Lewis Clark, Rattlesnake, that you all decided to take in Grant Creek, Miller Creek, Linda Vista, Pleasant View. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think what we're seeking here is a uniform rule, one that covers all zoning districts, so we have a standard that applies to everyone. I think that if we had excluded units, if we had excluded areas that were, say, not close to a bus line, then the charge against us would be that we are somehow trying to divide and conquer the single-family neighborhoods. we can't really make a right choice, it seems, when it comes to the opponents of this. As far as the owner occupancy enforceability, the city attorney's opinion was about the attempt to create zoning districts that excluded renters entirely. And he said zoning cannot be used to tell people that there cannot be a certain kind of person in a neighborhood. And I don't think you have to look too far into the opposition to this to see that what they would really like is zoning that dictates who may and may not live in a neighborhood based on who owns and does not own property. If the city attorney were here, he would be apoplectic to hear that opinion used in the way that it's being used, because he has repeatedly stated that that is not his intent, and there is no way to construe what he said as such. And quite frankly, John, you know this.
So I don't really know, Dennis, how to answer your question, because I kind of expect that down the line somewhere that those areas will be taken out and they'll concentrate on the University, Lewis and Clark, slant streets, Lower Rattlesnake, because that's where it'll happen, and mainly because of our university. I was a renter for years in this town before I was able to afford. I worked construction as a laborer, so it took me a long time to afford to buy a house. I chose a single-family neighborhood because it was just that, single-family neighborhood. Whether it was in Grant Creek, Linda Vista, or where it was, I happened to choose the Lewis and Clark area. And my neighbors chose it the same reason I chose it for. It was a great place to bring up kids. I had a backyard where the dog could run, and I had good neighbors. I knew most of my neighbors. I still know most of my neighbors. And when you start doing infill, you lose that touch. You lose that quality of life.
Hi, Caitlin Koppel. I represent Ward 4 along with John on the City Council. And we had a couple of questions, but I think they're sort of related. I wonder if we couldn't get maybe our city staff to weigh in, if you would. And it has to do with infrastructure and how we would decide kind of when separate hookups for heating and cooling systems were needed. When it was a detached ADU situation or an above garage or internal situation. And also if, Bob and Jason have said that they don't anticipate a huge change to the neighborhoods, but do we feel like from a city standpoint that existing infrastructure can handle the increased loads, modest though they may be? And if they can't, then who would pay? Would it fall to the existing neighborhoods to do upgrades to sewers and things like that, potentially? Thanks.
So I'm Lavelle Means with the City Planning and Development Services. And I think the first question you were asking about separate utility hookups for separate units. And I believe that's the case. If they're distinguished as different dwelling, then they have to have different hookups. The second question had to do with infrastructure extensions and gauging the capacity. And at this point, it's believed that we have the capacity. During a conditional use process, there would be an opportunity for some agency comment. If we wanted to seek that further, we can. But in terms of the impact of a subordinate second accessory unit, it's especially related to utilities. It's not that different from somebody adding on a bedroom, a bathroom, I guess, the things that take utilities, the bathrooms, the kitchen spaces, than what they can do already in a dwelling. And then the other infrastructure piece that we've heard a lot about has to do with parking. And the requirement is that the parking space has to be on site. So the impact is not off of the property. And that there's even a requirement in this proposal that if there's a deficit of parking for a main house, then they would have to provide the parking for that as well. So we're in fact taking some of the parking impact off of a street if there's a deficit in this proposal.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee Clemenson, and I served on the committee for the zoning when we adopted Title 20. And I've been going to most of the PAZ meetings, so most of you are aware of my presence. The Montana Supreme Court, under a ruling, State v. Stewart, ruled that an ADU was illegal. It involved a single-family unit in Grant Creek, and it made the ADU situation entirely illegal in a single-family unit. But we're back to it now, which I find entirely interesting. If the single-family unit ordinance goes through, single-family will cease to exist in Missoula and become multifamily, because you cannot add another unit in single-family and have it single-family, because you have a secondary unit. When it becomes secondary and you have a second unit in there, the requirement is now 2,700 square feet instead of 5,400, which is the smallest for single family. How do you address the fact that now you can have subdivision at 2,700 square feet for single family homes, and changing and getting rid of single family? You can't call it single family anymore. It's now multifamily, and it will change the entire character of all single family in the city of Missoula. And how do you address the fact, Mr. Jaffe and Mr. Weiner, that you have changed Missoula's single family zones across the city? We have a secondary question that will deal with covenants and how you're going to enforce covenants and the protections of covenants. Thank you.
Thank you. Some of the finer details of the zoning code I can't just rattle off the tip of my tongue, but I will say that you could certainly find a situation where you currently live in a single dwelling unit, single family zoned area, and your neighbor lives on 2 or 4 lots or whatever the case is, which sometimes aren't very big in the city. You might not even realize your neighbor lives on more than 1 lot. And with this, I could foresee a situation where that lot could be subdivided, which is not an easy task, but it could be subdivided with single-family units on it, each with an ADU. So you could potentially be living next to 1 unit right now, and in the future, perhaps be living next to 4 units or 6 units, depending on the size of that lot. I don't know that would be a common use, but I can certainly foresee a situation where that could happen in certain neighborhoods with larger parcels, and I'm sure staff could weigh in on that better.
So to be clear, that we're not talking about subdivision. We're not talking about making what was 5,400 square feet, 2,700 square feet. We're saying that 5,400 square foot lot would still have a primary residence, but it could have an accessory residence as well. It's not the same as now. It's a 2,700 foot lot requirement. The current proposal also requires that the parcel size be at least the required parcel size for the district. So you couldn't subdivide it and then have 2 with ADUs, because they would be below the standard for the district. So none of that's actually correct. The case that was referred to up in Grant Creek, I guess I don't exactly have that at my fingertips, but from my memory of it, it was talking about it's a civil violation related to covenants that didn't allow for second units. They had nothing to do specifically with ADUs, but with second units that were violated by covenants.
To be clear, we've been talking about this for a year. That's, I think, the first time I've heard that citation, but we'll welcome new information into the debate all the time. It appears the case has to do with the zoning restriction that, okay, well, you can all Google it. It's not the one that has to do with incest. It's the other one.
Hi, I'm Jessica Allred. The discussion at our table had to do with the enforceability of having the owner occupy one of the units, and we were just wondering if both sides could address the actual enforceability and how that would happen.
So when somebody comes in to get a permit to build an ADU, a building permit, part of that process would include signing some, and we're working out details in this, but it would include signing some kind of document verifying the owner occupancy and their intent to owner occupy. There would be a notation on the plat, on their deed, that indicated that the property had to be owner occupied. Not so much that creates an enforcement mechanism, but it creates a mechanism to make sure all future owners would be notified of that restriction. Enforcement from there, generally, so that's going to, anybody that's doing this legally either has to sign something falsely or basically that should cover it. As far as things that change in the future, which they of course do, future owners would be notified of it. Of course, people can choose to violate the law. So all enforcement in the city generally is complaint-based, which means that we don't go around and search everybody's homes all the time. We assume if something is egregious enough, somebody will complain, and then the city will aggressively enforce that.
So what he said right there, that'll really make you love your neighbor, won't it? Because they'll be able to tattle on you, all right, if you build such a thing. So that's a great ordinance to put in, tattle on each other. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. There was one on South Avenue that the needs were variance because we've never had this other stuff. So these are only examples of that. This variance was granted to these people so the mom could move into the house. The mom passed away. The variance required that the place be torn down. Well, it wasn't. It's still there. Mom passed away a long time ago. The other one's on Burlington. This lady bought a house in a single-family zone. There was 2 little shacks in the backyard. So she went through all this rigmarole. She came up with a big sad story. So there was a variance given to her. And this is this is enforcement. These are 2 little shacks. One's a bedroom. One's got the bathroom and the kitchen in. So if you got to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom, you got to go outside into the other unit. There's enforceability.
We've reached the 1 o'clock hour, which is our agreed time termination. Thanks, first of all, to our presenters for willing to come down here and share their perspectives on this issue. So big round of applause. My second point is that this is not the end of the discussion. It's never meant to be the end of the discussion. City Club hopes that you will take what you learned today and continue the discussion with your friends and families, and that you will do it in an air that is civil, informative, and towards the betterment of Missoula. Finally, there is on your tables some sheets that invite you to submit your suggestions for future City Club programs. We're happy to hear what you'd like to hear about and try to arrange those programs for you. So please take the sheet, take the time, and make a suggestion for a program you'd like to have. Thank you very much for attending City Club.